Oh, hello. I went live and then I walked away. I do things like that sometimes. Welcome to the stream, everybody. Today I'm talking about config files. Oh, you know what? I forgot. I have to do some actual announcement type things. I'm a very professional businesswoman. So, a couple things to remember. We have a community site. I don't know if you know this. I'm in charge of it. No one knows why. No, I do. I'm really good at it. And here we go. So if you go to discuss, you can ask all kinds of questions. If you don't get a chance to ask them today, feel free to follow up, ask me why I've done things, and we'll get more possibly experts to weigh in. So just remember that you can always go to the community site and check it out. Also, we're approaching Hacktoberfest, which is a word I've only recently learned. I think you hack your tobers. But if you want to know what CircleCI is doing with Hacktoberfest, we have a live website. You can go check it out. I don't have the link ready to share, but I totally will in the chat in a minute. And don't even worry about it. It's definitely going to happen. What else? Because I don't know. I'm a little excited to participate in Hacktoberfest. I've never been part of it before, but I like when people get to contribute to open source. And also personally, I really like when hackathons are not in person with a team of strangers you've never met before. Some people really like that. It's not for me. It's not for me. But now we're going to just start talking about configuration. So, you know what? Actually, no, I'm not going to leave it up. Okay. But I am going to share some screens with you. Ooh. So I kind of want to talk about the configuration file, just in general. Everything in CircleCI lives in this configuration file, right? This is its entire life source, beginning to end. Everything happens in the configuration file, which was a little new to me, right? My background is definitely, I want to say traditional developer, but that's not true. It's a web development. So I definitely wasn't used to the idea that this entire process happens just through this one data structure, which is the YAML file. So the spoiler is, I have no idea how most of this works. Today, we're going to try to learn some things together, and hopefully it won't be too confusing for any of us. But the comments I can see, so if you want to ask questions or offer help when I get stuck, feel free to do that over in the chat, regardless of if you're on YouTube or Twitch or wherever. Add it in, and I will probably see it. So I am going to share. Okay, I'm going to blow this up. I know how the internet works. Rule 1, make big. Okay. It's still maybe not. I hope that's big enough. You can pop into the chat if it's not. But this is a default config file, and I don't say default. It's this is what you'll find in the docs. It's not specific, right, to any language. So the first thing to notice here is that this configuration file is in YAML, which I had never used before, right? I'm just kind of loyal to JSON, I guess. I'm not, but it's definitely what I was accustomed to using in web development, right? We send a lot of JSON around. But YAML is really similar. So it's a data structure. It's actually, I think, a superset of JSON. You can look it up. I'm not going to pretend I know. But basically, everything here is a data structure, and it is very loosely key values, right? So you can see here, Vim mode, showing off how fancy I am. So you can see here the keys, jobs, build, Docker, etc. Right? So we're seeing here a really loosely key value relationship, which is like, that sounds familiar, that I can do. And what I want to know, I guess, is like which pieces of this config file are like required. Like, what do you need for CircleCI config, like just to go? And if you use the web UI, which I recommend, it's very good. We have a crackerjack team of developers who have made it really nice. So if you use the web UI, sometimes it will give you the option of like generating a config file for you, which is awesome because you don't want to have to do it yourself every time. But I know a lot of developers personally who don't use, well, UIs that much, and they definitely don't use generators. So a lot of the folks I know are just like, well, no, I always just write my config file from scratch. And when I thought like, oh, I could do that, and then it turns out I couldn't. So one of the things I wanted to kind of explore is like, well, if you were going to write one, what are like the building blocks of a config file? And then that sort of like led me to a lot of other points, like, well, what is the building blocks of CircleCI? Because the config file is the heart here, right? There's everything CircleCI needs to know happens in this YAML. So as I'm like looking through, this is the one from the docs, first line version, great. That's a pretty standard first line. We don't need to worry about that. There are kind of like three pieces here. There are the jobs, the individual jobs you want to run for this project. And YAML is all based on indentations, yeah? So underneath indented from jobs, and also can I just recommend that you should definitely use a formatter. If you get the indentation wrong on your YAML, it won't be a valid file, right? This is one of the reasons people are a little grumpy with YAML, I suppose, is just that like a lot of, other formats and data structures, it's really specific about how it looks. So keep in mind that everything here is indentation based. So the first thing in this file are jobs. So I think if you've used CircleCI at all, you kind of are familiar with the idea of jobs, right? These are just literally like the tasks happening. Like these are the things happening when you build or you run this project. But that's like, it's one of those things that you just sort of like understand when you're like, yeah, it's doing a job. That sort of makes sense, right? But also the more I sort of dug into it, the more I was like, wait, do I not understand this? The answer was, of course, no, I don't. So here are some of the jobs in this default file. There's a build, and then nested inside of the build is this Docker, and then an image. And because this is a default, it's not pointing to a specific version right now. We're going to look at a more specific one later, but right now we're just going to go through the basics here. So job one is build. So anything that's on the same level of indentation as build is another job. So there's build and there's test. There's only two jobs in this default file because it's for learning. So putting a lot of jobs in here probably wouldn't be a great idea. And then the other important piece to recognize down here is workflows. So workflows And then there's a key here, which is build and test. That's the name of our workflow. So it could be named anything, but as always in programming and in life, better to name it something that explains what it does so there's no guessing. So our workflow here is called build and test. And underneath this workflow, these are the jobs it calls. So again, this like looks sort of familiar to us, right? Like if you live in developer land, which is like Candyland, except there's a lot less candy. Sorry, I was thinking about candy. Usually this is the time when I eat my first gummy worms of the day, and I'm doing this with you all instead. And I'm not rude, so I'm not eating them on camera. A workflow is basically like a place where you tell it like how you want these jobs to happen. So the jobs, we know what they're like pretty simple, right? The job is build using this Docker image. And using the steps, check out, and then run. And you can see up in the build job under run, this is just an echo, right? Again, this is an example file. It's just gonna put some text out, echo. But workflows are a way to orchestrate your jobs, because jobs don't just happen like, you know, organically in the wild. You can kind of tell them when you want them to run. So this all sort of like makes sense, I think. And when I was looking at these, I understood this. I looked at this file and I said, this totally makes sense. I think I do understand config files. I think I'm really good at this. I was not correct, but that's okay. So what I did is I pulled some demo config files from some sample projects, which I'll show you where those live if you want. But basically right now, I still have the version number up top, but now we have some more explanation, right? Everything is commented here because this is the Go configuration. I'm sure you'll hear a lot of people have a lot of opinions about whether or not to comment your code. I personally am bad at it. You know, in Go, it is much more common. And I really like it for learning purposes, right? Like when you're new to something, it's really excellent to have just written out what each of these is doing. So I pulled this config file. Let me show you where I got it from. From this sample project. These are really excellent resources if you're trying to learn things. And if you end up wanting to do things more sophisticated than what I'll be doing today, these are really good places to look. So I pulled the one from the Go file or from the Go project because I think it is, one, because these comments are really excellent for understanding, but also I just think it's like one of the simpler configurations. And I'll show you why after we go through this. But we're doing the same things, right? We have the version number, use CircleCI 2.0. Of course you are. You're a very current person. You would never use last season's version. Jobs, again, explained here better than I did earlier, probably. Jobs are the basic units of work. So what builds do we have in this Go project? So underneath our build job, we use the CircleCI Go image. And we point to it using the version, right? This is like pretty standard for Docker. If you just show where does it live and what version do you want. This project is also using Postgres. So it's also pointing to the CircleCI Postgres image. These things all make sense to me so far. I hope you're on board. And then, of course, your environment variables, any credentials you might need for the database. Then we have here parallelism 2, which is, look, I could probably do a whole stream on parallelism and get it wrong. But very basically, this is like the number of things happening at the same time, right? The number of, I was going to say jobs, but I don't know if that's true. I think it's just, yeah, it's just, it means run 2 things at the same time. Let's move on before I confuse myself further. Sometimes I just have the tendency to overthink things. And I think that's when it gets a little, not only do I confuse myself, I confuse other people as well. It's a superpower that I have. But yeah, so parallelism means that we can run 2 containers at the same time. I'm just going to keep putting nouns in there until someone corrects me. And then we also have to tell it, where do we want to put the test results? So you can already see that there's like a little more nuance here than there was in the default sample config I was showing, right? So in a real project, you not only want to run your tests, but you want to maybe save those results somewhere. So you have to specify like where you're going to save those results. And this is something I actually see fairly common with folks in the community, is that there's an important step here as part of this build job that gets left out. And it's line 20 right here, which is making the test results directory. So a lot of times, if you don't create this directory, then you'll get an error, right? Because the directory doesn't exist. I see this happen just like, it's just an easy step to forget. So this is just a gentle reminder for all of you circle heads, you spherical serpents. I don't know what I want to call you all yet. I'll work on it. For now, you're just gonna be circle heads, even though it's not good. I'll workshop it. But this is just something I see happen really often. I hear people asking this question, like with this error that basically points back to, we just forgot to make the directory, no biggie. So this, checking out the source code to the working directory and making the test results directory are the steps that make up the build job. So you can see the nesting here, yeah? So this steps is still nested under build. So just, again, indentation, it matters in YAML. So keep track of these. And then one of the other steps we have down here is restore cache. Basically, this is just a way, every time you run, later on down here somewhere, I'm probably skipping ahead. There's this step down here where we save the cache. Don't worry about that right now. And then we want to restore it. This is like a little, like, I don't want to say it makes a huge difference in performance, because I don't know that that's true. But it's still like, you don't want to run everything if you don't need to, right? So you can see here, restore cache is the name of the step. And then the keys are checksum, go.sum. So wait for Postgres to be ready, which is really just like making sure that your database is up and running. So you're not trying to run this job and have it fail just because Postgres wasn't awake or alive or ready. And then this step is running your unit tests. So again, these are some more just like environment details. What do you need here? You need your database info and your migration files for Postgres. This is the land of relational databases since we're using Postgres in this example. So you have to run your migrations and tell it where to find your database. And then it will also use the credentials that you set up earlier. Then now, remember we talked about storing the results of our tests. We just ran our tests. So guess what? Now it is time. It's time to save them. So there's like some bashy things happening here. I'll be the first to say, I'm not exactly a gopher. And what I mean by that is someone who writes Golang, if you're not familiar. You don't need to know Go to understand this config file for the most part. Most of it's pretty standard. Also, I live by a train. I feel like you could hear that, but just to let you know that I'm not chewing at you. So now it's time to store our test results. Basically, here's some bash to tell it where to go. If you have questions about this, just hit me up on the internet and we can go through it. But I think for now, it's not super important to what we're doing. It's just some bash to say, here's where I want you to put my test results. And then you run make, which is, again, I think a Go thing, which is basically like, yeah, compile, make it. Yeah, I don't think that was very clear, but make is a Go command to, I think it turns the program into a lol. I was going to say executable, but I think that's Windows. My brain is totally melting. The train really chewed me. You understand. But yes, Go make compiles. So here where we can see the save cache step, which we talked about earlier when it restores the cache. Here's the initial save. So basically, like, you can think about this as like an iterative process, right? So at this point, this step is to save the cache, which is what is going on here. Tells it where to save it. And then when we hit that restore cache, this is where it will pull it from. And then this step is to start the service. So again, here's my database. Here's my migrations. And like, keep this service running while we do the next step. So this is, again, this is a really well named. This is the reason the demos are, I think, really good and important for learning is that like this step is called start service because that's what it does. And this background true, make sure the service keeps running while we do the next step, which is to validate the service is working. Hooray! So, you know, again, just a little bit here of a bash, which is wait 5 seconds and then use curl to verify that like you're getting a response from the service. And then you can upload the test summary to your artifacts. And this is something that like artifacts are a CircleCI thing where, you know, sometimes you want to go like view your test summary, view the specific test results. This is what saves it, and it tells you where. So this is the path to storing artifacts. Great. Hope you're getting all this. I'm just kind of walking through this, but I know that like probably this is like a baby Einstein for a lot of you folks, but I think it's really important to nail the fundamentals so that as you build and write more complex config files, you really understand the pieces that you're putting together. So, you know, this is community time with Katie. We're not here to solve I almost said the Higgs boson. That's not a problem. That's just the name of a particle. I was trying to think of like a famous unsolvable math problem, but guess what? It's community time with Katie, so I couldn't think of it. Okay. So we store the test results and the test summary. Just for future usage, those are things that like you might look back on to when you're debugging or just to see like what is going on. They're stored somewhere so you can have them. But now we're at workflows. Oh my gosh, we're finally out of this indentation. That means we're done with all the jobs. I'm gonna zoom out a little bit just so we can see. Boop, boop, boop. Oh, so close. Okay, that's fine. But you can see, okay, well, I did some things. I deleted it. I deleted it on accident. You know what? Don't worry about it. Don't save. Just reopen it. I don't pretend again. Community time. I didn't come on here to show you my BIM skills. I just wanted to show you that we're finally out of the jobs and the build section. So you can see here is the build indentation. We'll go on down. The build starts on line 3. And then this is fun. I guess we're just going to scroll together. Cool. So we do all of these steps as part of build. And that's kind of our only job here. So we're done with jobs. Now we're in workflows, and it's again pretty simple. There's a version number. Great. This is the name of our workflow. So build workflow is, again, this is, keep in mind, it's very much like key value here. So build workflow could be called something else, but you want to name it what makes sense. So the name of this workflow is build workflow. And inside of a workflow, what you want to do is tell it what order things happen in. So we only have one job in this config file, so it can really only be build. But putting things into workflows gives us a better way to orchestrate all of the jobs, because realistically, this is a great demo, but you probably will have multiple jobs. So let's pop over and look at some other examples that aren't in my code editor, so I can't just erase them accidentally when I feel like it. So I'm in our docs. You all know you like docs. I get it. You can look for some sample config files here that will be, again, like a little bit vague around, you know, language, etc., but we'll show you some interesting pieces. So one of the things I want to show is that there's a difference here between a concurrent workflow and a sequential workflow. So in this example that we're looking at, which I can make a little bigger, I think, whoop, in our workflows section, we have a workflow called build and test, and it has two jobs, build and test. Great. This is an example of concurrent workflows, which means that these two jobs run at the same time. But sometimes you need a more fine-grained control. So if you need the jobs to if you need them to happen in a specific order, then a sequential workflow makes a lot more sense. So then we'll look at this, which again, I feel like it's maybe like a little small for y'all, but excuse me. So here we have workflows. We still just have the one workflow, build and test. But under the job section, you'll see this is different, right? You have our two jobs, build and test, but test now has some extra sort of requirements, which is that it requires build. So test is not going to happen until build happens, until build is done. That's what a sequential workflow means. This is, again, I think that like, if you're accustomed to a lot of, programmatic logic, that's definitely a lot of what's happening here. It's just happening in this data structure. So it can feel a little weird until you get used to it. At least that's been sort of my experience. And then also, I'll show you one more here, which is the approve job or the approval workflow. So let's pop down here. So, here are all our jobs. We have build, test, deploy. Those are very common jobs. Great names, very descriptive. But inside of the workflows, you'll see we have one workflow still. It's called build and test. Jobs, build, and then the test requires the build to be finished. So this is what we just learned. This is a sequential workflow. So test doesn't happen until build is done. But there's some extra steps here. Hold. Type approval requires build and test. So what does this mean? Great question. But you can see that like the same sequential logic we were looking at is happening down here. So basically, this approval step means that deploy requires this hold, which means that it doesn't deploy until all of these are done. It doesn't hit the deployed job until both of these are finished and approved. So that's just like a way to see that there's like how we start building complexity in a config file, right? We go from this, which is like an excellent place to start, and start adding in, right? Like this is a sequential workflow because test requires build. But there are a million ways for your config files to get more complicated. One of the ones I also wanted to show, it's probably fun for you all to just like wait for me to just like find stuff. I think it's probably fun for you. You know what? I'm not gonna, I'm just gonna open it in the browser. I'm not even gonna worry about it. Sorry, I'm just checking on my notes to make sure, and then also get this caffeine into my body. The problem when I get on stream is that I just get like very excited and I talk too fast. And then sometimes I just go a little sideways, and you'd think the caffeine would be the wrong choice, but it actually keeps me really going. So I'm actually just going to go back to CircleCI public, and I'm going to look for, oh, that's not where I want to search. Is it? No. Too many. Yeah, this is the one I want. So this is a demo project using React Native. And this was one of the config files I had considered using, but I'll tell you why I didn't. You see me scrolling? That's why, mostly. Some technologies are just going to require a little bit more, right? I think Go by its nature is, I don't want to, I'll say maybe like minimalist. and has those comments. So that makes for a config file that's like pretty explanatory. But this like React Native config file, for me, because I don't write React much, wasn't as good of an example because I don't know what some of this means. But hopefully, if I look through the steps here, it will be, I might not know the React portions, but like we should still be able to figure out what's happening here. So here are the jobs. It'll be easier. I'm just going to pop this over into my editor. Since we all know, I just delete what I want. Anyway, boop, 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 boop. Okay. So now my file is named incorrectly, but don't worry about it. I'm going to make it even bigger. Okay. So if I walk through this file, which I haven't really looked at before, I should still be able to figure out what's happening, even though I don't know React. This isn't the one I wanted to walk through like first. But that's mostly because like when I looked at this file, I found it to be like a little intimidating. And I was like, oh, can you find me one that's like for babies? And then I sort of worked up from there. None of them are for babies. They're all for very strong professional people like you and I. But so version number, I totally had this one. I know what that is. CircleCI version 2.1. Great. And then we enter the job section. So the first job is Node. That's familiar to me. I tell it where the working directory is, and then I tell it this is the Node Docker image that I want to use. Great. So far, my knowledge of JavaScript has not let me down. The steps inside of the Node job include checkout. Standard makes sense. I understand checkout. Is it fair to say that's universal? Every time, I hesitate to make sweeping generalizations because this is the internet, but I'm going to do it. No, I'm not. But checkout, very common. I think it will probably mostly always be there. Here we see restore cache. We just talked about that. So I might not know what this portion of like the key value means here. Like this value is like cool. But what I do know is this is where it's like, this is where the cache is stored so that it can restore it. So I don't necessarily need to understand this part right now. Here's another step. Now this is different, right? Because we definitely didn't have this step twice in any of our other configs. So I'm a little curious about that. I'm looking at it. It looks like maybe this is the cache for Yarn, and this is the cache for Node. Cool. I'm like trying to understand this, but I don't even really use Yarn very much. So maybe it's just an extra Yarn thing up here. But again, I still I don't really know. Like if you were like, Katie, explain to me in 10 seconds what this step is doing, I would say like, oh, well, this is where it's restoring the cache. This one is for Yarn. This one is for Node, right? Like I maybe don't understand why they have separate caches, but I don't necessarily need to understand the config. Then we're on this step, which is run, which is Yarn install, which kind of, gets all your packages in order. I've JavaScripted. And this is the save cache step. So in our other config, they were relatively far apart in the steps, but here they're kind of near each other, so it's easier to understand. It tells you basically how and where it's saving the cache. So There's one for yarn and one for node. So I don't know why they necessarily have separate caches, but that's because they don't use yarn, and I feel fine about that. That's like a thing that I don't know that is fine that I don't know. The node cache is stored in node modules. That makes sense. Everything is stored in node modules, just like your life, all of your memories, just like equations and moments, and it's all in there. So now we're in the run step. So the name of this step is just tests, which is very fun to say. I recommend it. Just tests. But I know what this does, right? This is me like running the steps for this project. So, remember this. Make sure to remember to make the test result directory for your test results. It's right here. Hooray. So I am making this directory for my jest tests. And then I am running the command yarn run test to kick it off. And then here's an environment. I'm just looking at this one because well, this is where you're saying, hey, put the output of these tests into this specific file in this directory. See how I was confused for a second there, but then I figured it out? We're learning. And then this is a new one, right? This is persist to workspace, which we haven't seen in any of the other configs. So what is persist to workspace? Let's just go to the docs. Persist underscore Q. Here it is. Is a special step used to persist a temporary file to be used by another job in the workflow. Okay, that sort of makes sense to me. Let's see what it's Sorry, my brain broke a little bit and then I lost track of where we were. I think it just scrolled down. There we are. So persist to workspace is here. It's saving this directory in the node modules path to the node modules path, I should say, so that we can use it again later. Here's the step to store the test results. We've already created the directory that they go in and told it explicitly which file to put them in. So now all we have to do is tell it, hey, remember, look at it highlighting all those smart things we already did. So we already made the test results directory. We tell it where to go. Great. And then we also tell it to store the artifacts in the same directory. That makes sense to me. I think it's fair to put them in the same directory. They're very related. And now we're on a new job. And you can tell that because of the indentation. So this job is called Mac OS Build and Test. Again, unless, I mean, look, I am like 90% sure it's Mac OS and not MacOS, but I would like for it to be MacOS. But that wouldn't be as descriptive, so not a good name. So this job has a working directory that's basically kind of looks like the root directory, specifies an Xcode version on Mac OS, sets some environment variables, cool, and then starts going into the steps, right? Check out. Ooh, remember when I said it was universal? Let's pretend that was true. Here it is, right? Just check out the code, get up to date. Tell it where restore cache. We've talked about that enough, I think. Runs yarn install to get all your dependencies in order. Saves the caches. Fantastic. This is all, we've seen all this, right? Like, I don't have questions about this, which is why I'm not explaining it, because I think we've talked about it enough that now I actually know what's happening. There's some comments here about Cocoapods. I've never used Cocoapods, but there's some really helpful comments here about the guides and whether or not you should ignore certain directories. So just an excellent comment about Cocoapods. More information about restoring and saving the cache. And then there's a run command here, and this command is pod install, and the working directory is just iOS. But let's go into like a little bit more. This is the bundle install, which is, again, it's just fun to bundle. Very similar to the yarn install we saw earlier. Save those caches. Save those caches. So here are some questions I have, because I don't know React Native. So questions I would have about this as we go is that, like, I know what each of these steps means individually, and that's really what I was aiming for today. So I think we've done that. But like a question I would maybe have for later is like, why so many times, right? Like, why so many different caches? Like, what exactly, like, these are maybe more specific, or they're obviously more specific to like React Native, right? Is it because it's a more complex environment? Are there just more tools at work where you have to save the caches individually? Like, I don't know. These would be things I'd be interested to know if I were like using a config file like this. This is where you run Fastlane because this project uses Fastlane. Command bundle exec, which I am just notoriously, I will try to bundle something for, I don't know, years, and then remember that I need to use bundle exec, which is kind of like a higher permission bundle. Tells you where to store. Now we've moved on to a different operating system, right? Now, instead of Mac OS, we're on Android build and test. It's the new job. I'm going to scroll a little faster just so we can say. So it does make sense to me that there's like different, that there might be some repetition of steps because these jobs are doing very similar things, but for different operating systems. So it makes sense to me that like where they get and store the cache would be different. Bundle install. Do Fastlane tests. Okay. Yeah, so again, they're making the test directory. They're making sure all of their gems here are, oh no, sorry, bundle exec Fastlane test, which I think is them maybe running the Fastlane tests. I've never used Fastlane, I have to admit. And then moving these Fastlane test results from what I think is the default location to our specified test results directory. Ooh, now we hit workflows. So those were all the jobs. So like obviously there's like a lot more jobs in this project than the other ones. I just want to like get down so we can see all the workflows. So this workflow is called Node, Android, iOS, which basically just tells you all the things that are going to be happening here. And the jobs, you can see we've hit some of those sequential workflows. So first job inside the Node, Android, iOS workflow is Node. And both the Android and Mac OS jobs require the Node job. So the Node job is kind of like, it's going to be done first, but these two, Android and Mac OS, can be concurrent. So this is like a really good example of them happening This is using both sequential and concurrent workflows. So I just think, we've done a really excellent job of coming full circle, because I'm really proud of myself that I learned something today. I learned about, I paused because my brain broke. What did I learn? And then I just blue screen and you never hear from me again. I think it's always good. Like, I feel like I sort of knew about concurrent and sequential workflows, but looking at these examples, and talking through it actually has increased my understanding of config files, immensely. And it's hard when other people are, super familiar with config files, or maybe you're a super seasoned developer. Maybe this isn't necessarily helpful for you, but I think that, again, really understanding these fundamentals is the way that going forward, I'll be able to look at more complex configuration files and be able to use these sort of building blocks to understand them. Because if you look at, let's say you work at, I don't know, Big Company 2. And Big Company 2 is ooh, such a good CircleCI user. They have been using it for 9 years. That's how old we are, by the way. We just turned 9. No big deal. We're a 4th grader. And you have this config file that's been with you that whole time and been evolving. There's probably some amount of sprawl and complications involved in that, right? That's just kind of what happens to our work over time. One recommendation is that you revisit those, right? You get you audit your config file every now and then so that you can kind of control that. But also, the better we understand these very small fundamental steps, the easier it is to see when things can be cleaned up, right? So I had questions as we were going through about, well, why are there so many different caches? And then I sort of as I went through, so okay, well, these are clearly caches for different things, right? Yarn and Node have different caches. That sort of makes sense. But what if it was a repetition, a repetitive step, knowing these things and being able to just kind of very easily see them would help me be able to keep my config file in line. So if I pop back over to this kind of tabula rasa of YAML files here, I think that if you can spend time understanding every step in your jobs and every job in your workflow, and then every workflow in your pipeline, you will have this really holistic view of the system. And that's sort of what I'm working towards learning with you all. I haven't been a Circle user for 9 years. Circle might be a 4th grader, but I am a CircleCI baby. So I want to make sure that as I grow with this tool, that the knowledge that I do have is rock solid. So basically what we did today is we dug through a few different configuration files. This default one, which isn't language specific because it's meant for learning. This is what I would start with. If you said oh, I want to write my own config file, this is a good template if you need one. And just, use your language of choice for whatever project you want to test it with. Then we looked at the Go configuration file, which I erased accidentally multiple times, and then once on purpose. Replaced it with this React Native file, even though it still says Go. And you can look at all of these demo projects on the CircleCI public repo. So you can see, if I search for demo, here we go. So you can see there's a JavaScript and Express. I know Express. I probably should have used that one instead of React Native, but we all learn together. You can use any of these demo projects to like look through and ask questions about the config files, because I think these are the ones that make the most sense. And if your company or you personally are using CircleCI and you're going through the config and you just like don't know what a piece does, like don't hesitate to come over to the community and ask, and we'll try to figure it out, or to contact support, right? They're there to help you too. You can go to discuss any old time, discuss.circleci.com, and we can hang out. We'll be there to answer your questions and talk through. If you have questions about today's stream, you can ask them there. That's also where you can find more information if you just tuned in on the off chance I would mention Hacktoberfest. Well, then you can do that too. There's all the information about where we'll be on the internet now and in the future is on Discuss. Ask your questions. Be nice. Help other people. If you watched this stream today and you were like, this is for babies, I know everything. Great news. There are a lot of people who could use your help, and they're all on Discuss. So I'd be really, really happy to see you there. But that's all we have time for today. I've exhausted my own brain. I confused myself a couple times. I both bragged about using Vim and then kind of hung it up. So I feel like we've really hit full circle for today. I like you all. I want you to be as safe as you can. Wear a mask, wash your hands, and always prioritize the most vulnerable. Bye.